Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight,
we are all ready to go to work.
On the eve of Donald Trump's inauguration as the 45th President of the United States, the nation prepares for a new leader of the free world. Then the President-elect's picks face the Senate scrutiny. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry defends his nomination as Energy Secretary, while Treasury Secretary nominee Steven Mnuchin is asked about his controversial financial record. And faking normal, one woman's story about losing all her income and discovering the invisible fence keeping older women out of the workforce.
You're the loser. You know, how can you have this kind of background and be landing here?
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. The tumultuous campaign and stunning election victory have all been prelude to tomorrow for Donald Trump. He made ready today for his formal inauguration as president. John Yang has our report.
President-elect Trump arrived at Joint Base Andrews outside Washington almost exactly 24 hours before he takes the oath of office. Vice President-elect Mike Pence was already in Washington talking up the transition.
And I'm pleased to have a chance to report to the American people and to all of you the progress that we have made at the President-elect's direction, preparing a team that will be ready to serve the American people and make America great again on day one.
But a series of reports, including in the New York Times and Politico, quoted Obama national security officials saying that the Trump team's delay in filling some jobs had slowed the transition. Today, Trump spokesman Sean Spicer said key Obama officials would stay until successors were picked.
We've appointed over 50 people in critical positions to maintain their office. We've looked through the entire government and found areas where there's a critical need to maintain someone.
They include Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Work and Brett McGurk, the envoy to the international coalition combating ISIS. At the same time, Spicer slammed Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer for slowing the confirmation of Mr. Trump's cabinet.
Why are they delaying Elaine Chao? Why are they not moving on Dr. Ben Carson? Why are they not moving on Governor Nikki Haley?
Schumer said the delays were over ethics concerns.
If there was ever a group of the cabinet nominees that cry out for rigorous scrutiny, it's this one. Every day, there's another report of a major ethical lapse among the nominees for the cabinet, the swamp cabinet.
Spicer said it's all politics.
These people have had their paperwork in, their quality and caliber and integrity is unquestionable. And I think to see some of these attacks and the focus not be on issues like schools and teachers and homeland security is a problem.
This morning, Mr. Trump made his final cabinet pick, naming former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue as his choice to be Agriculture Secretary. Perdue was the state's first Republican governor since Reconstruction and started businesses that deal in fertilizers and grain trading. With the Perdue pick, Mr. Trump has rounded out a proposed cabinet slate that, for the first time in nearly 30 years, includes no Hispanic nominees. Spokesman Spicer insisted today that in time, there will be diversity when the Trump administration is considered in its totality.
He continues to put together an amazingly diverse cabinet. And I think, so if you're looking specifically at Hispanics, I think as we move forward, we've got 5,000 jobs to fill. There's going to be a tremendous number of Hispanic Americans that fill those posts.
Later at a luncheon at his Trump Hotel in Washington, he indicated that Woody Johnson, owner of the New York Jets NFL team, would be nominated as ambassador to Great Britain. This afternoon, Mr. Trump took part in a wreath-laying ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, a tradition for incoming presidents on the eve of taking office.
And I won't forget the men who died, who gave...
He ended his day making an entrance at a sunset concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.
In the day's other news, President Obama issued a final round of commutations on his last full day in office. He shortened the prison sentences of 330 federal inmates convicted of drug crimes, the most ever commutations in a single day. The White House said he has now cut the sentences of 1,715 people during his time in office. That is more than any other American president. He has also freed 568 inmates who had been serving life terms in prison. The Obama administration has punctuated its fight against the Islamic State with a major airstrike in Libya. The Pentagon says that it targeted militants who were actively planning attacks in Europe. The raid last night hit ISIS camps 30 miles south of the Libyan city of Sirte, and it killed 80 fighters. 2 B-2 stealth bombers flew for 30 hours from Missouri to Libya and back, and they dropped roughly 100 guided bombs. The planes had not seen combat since 2011.
This was a decision made by commanders based on the specific mission requirements here, the capabilities of the B-2 specifically, not only in terms of its payload, but also its ability to loiter. There were specific reasons why the commanders felt this was the appropriate platform to use.
The Pentagon says that initial assessments are that the strike was successful, but it is unclear whether any high-profile ISIS leaders were killed. The death toll from yesterday's suicide bombing in Mali has risen to 77. The bombers struck government forces and former rebels who've been trying to enforce a 2015 peace treaty. Surveillance footage captured the blast as the vehicle breached a compound where fighters had gathered for a meeting. The group linked to al-Qaeda claimed responsibility. A political crisis intensified in the African nation of Gambia today, with a defeated president refusing to step aside. Troops from neighboring states entered the small West African nation to force him out after the new president took the oath of office. Parak O'Brien of Independent Television News has our report.
A nation holds its breath in the run-up to a defining inauguration. The swearing in of a political outsider, a reformer on a promise to make a country great. This afternoon, the elected president of the Gambia, Adama Barrow, took the oath.
I, Adama Barrow, do swear.
The ceremony, though, took place at the Gambian embassy in neighbouring Senegal. The man beaten in elections last year, Yahya Jammeh, is digging his heels in, holed up in the presidential palace. In power for 22 years, once said he'd rule Gambia for 1 billion years, Allah permitting. In a show of regional unity, troops from the Economic Community of West African states on the move into Gambia. The aim to pressurise Jammeh to relinquish power. These pictures taken today reportedly show ECOWAS forces in Senegal heading for the Gambian border. Ultimate destination, the capital. This is a decisive moment for the region, an early intervention by a coalition of West African countries dealing with a West African problem. The inauguration, a decisive moment for Gambians themselves.
Later, the West African military force halted its advance into Gambia until midday tomorrow to give mediation a last chance. Disaster struck in the capital of Iran this morning when a 17-story building caught fire and collapsed. The mayor of Tehran said that at least 20 firefighters were killed, but casualty figures fluctuated as rescuers searched the wreckage for survivors and bodies. State TV showed the moment the historic building crumbled, with firefighters still inside. One official said the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit. In central Italy, rescuers spent this day desperately digging into a luxury mountain hotel that was shattered by an avalanche. They found 2 survivors and 2 bodies, but up to 30 people could have been inside. Aerial views showed the 4-story hotel buried up to the roof and its sides smashed in. Crew used heavy vehicles to clear paths through snow as deep as 16 feet.
I want to say that we are all holding our breath for what has happened last night with the avalanche. We saw the videos of rescuers reaching the hotel. These videos bear testimony to the sense of duty of the rescuers, but also to the very hard conditions they are operating in.
The avalanche followed a series of strong earthquakes in the area, but it is unclear if the quakes caused the disaster. Mexico announced late today that it has extradited the accused drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman to the U.S. He allegedly founded and led the Sinaloa cartel. Guzman was captured in Mexico in early 2014. He escaped and was finally recaptured a year ago. Back in this country, the Republican National Committee has elected a new chair, Ronna Romney McDaniel. She's a niece of Mitt Romney, the party's presidential nominee 4 years ago, and the choice of President-elect Trump. She takes over for Reince Priebus, who is becoming Mr. Trump's White House chief of staff. And on Wall Street, stocks slipped again as yields on bonds rose. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 72 points to close at 19,732. The Nasdaq fell 15, and the S&P 500 slipped 8. Still to come on the NewsHour, the nominees for Treasury and Energy Secretary face tough questions before the Senate. A rocky presidential transition on national security. The difficult road of people who appear middle class but are on the edge of financial ruin, and much more. The president-elect moved a bit closer to getting his cabinet in place with another round of confirmation hearings today. The most contentious was for his Treasury Secretary pick, Steven Mnuchin, a billionaire banker who worked at Goldman Sachs and owned a hedge fund. There was important news that came out during the hearing. Mnuchin said that he would support raising the debt ceiling sooner rather than later and not risk the country defaulting. The president-elect had previously suggested that he might want to renegotiate the government's obligations instead. But most of the focus was on Mnuchin's business background and investments. Lisa Desjardins has our report.
He came prepared for a broadside attack.
I have been maligned as taking advantage of others' hardship in order to earn a buck. Nothing could be further than the truth.
Steven Mnuchin began his appeal to become Treasury Secretary by defending his record at the helm of OneWest, a bank that Democratic critics say was a foreclosure machine during the housing crisis.
OneWest extended over 100,000 loan modifications to delinquent borrowers to try to help them out of a bad situation.
But Oregon Democrat Ron Wyden disputed Mnuchin's version.
Investigations found that the bank frequently mishandled documents and skipped over reviewing them. All it took to plunge families into the nightmare of potentially losing their home was 30 seconds of sloppy paperwork and a few haphazard signatures.
It was some of the most dogged questioning of President-elect Trump's nominees yet, and it was tense between senators.
Senator Wyden, I've got a Valium pill here that you might want to take before the second round.
Mr. Chairman, I hope that comment about Valium doesn't set the tone for 2017 in this committee.
Wyden also pressed Mnuchin about reports that he initially didn't reveal more than $100 million of assets on disclosure forms, and that he left out his role directing some offshore accounts.
How many employees did you have in Anguilla?
We didn't have any employees in Anguilla.
How many customers did you have there?
We didn't have any customers that resided in Anguilla.
Did you have an office there?
We did not have an office ourselves there.
So you just had a post office box?
I would diligently look at these things, and I can assure you I paid all my taxes as was required.
New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez dug in.
One does not go and create offshore entities at the end of the day other than to avoid in some form or fashion the tax laws of the United States. That's pretty simple.
But Mnuchin surprised some, saying that he agrees that offshore accounts are a problem he wants to fix.
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely committed to work with you in your office, as I've said, on tax simplification and to cut down and make sure that we don't let anybody avoid taxes. I'd be happy to work with your office to simplify the tax code.
Committee Chairman Orrin Hatch called Democrats' focus on those offshore accounts hypocritical and ironic.
Evidently, memories are short. At least two of President Obama's nominees who now serve in his cabinet, had Cayman Island holdings.
Democrats returned to Mnuchin's role with One West back in 2009. According to an independent California housing organization, One West aggressively foreclosed on some 60,000 homes while Mnuchin ran it. Also this fall, two advocacy groups asked the Department of Housing and Urban Development to investigate possible discrimination, charging that One West offered fewer mortgages and options to minorities. Mnuchin sold that bank for $3.4 billion in 2015 and has denied anything improper. He told the committee it was not just about profit, but saving a dying bank.
Overall, I helped many homeowners stay in their homes and escape financial ruin through my management of One West Bank. My experience confirmed that we must identify and eliminate unwise and burdensome policies which contributed to the disastrous outcomes that came in the wake of the financial collapse.
At one point, the Treasury nominee also pushed back at Democrats.
It seems to me, in all due respect, you just want to shoot questions at me and not let you...
I'll let you explain when I'm done with this. But Mr. Mnuchin, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
At least understand these are complicated questions.
They are complicated.
As the top economic official, there was plenty of policy talk, too. Mnuchin said he would enforce current Russian sanctions and would keep the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, though he questioned its funding source.
And Lisa joins me now. So, Lisa, you were there for the hours of this hearing. Did you come away with a particular impression of Steve Mnuchin?
I just thought he had a good seat, and I have to say, I think what he was trying to telegraph to the committee is that he is more moderate than his opponents are casting him. And we have to see what he does if he's confirmed as secretary, but things like the CFRB saying that he would keep that. And he also said things like, I want to increase the staff at the IRS. These are things conservatives have traditionally gone after, and he said to this committee, I'm going to be more reasonable. He used those words.
CFRB being the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I want to ask you about the status of one of the President-elect's other nominees to be the budget director, Nick Mulvaney, the congressman from South Carolina. He's run into some problems over an employee of his family.
That's correct. That's right. He told the Senate about a month ago that he found out a caregiver for his children who worked for him for a few years, he did not pay taxes for that person. He's now paying those back taxes. But it seems that this might really be a problem. The reason I think so is that we haven't seen statements from leading Republicans supporting him today. And I spoke to another Republican senator, Judy, who said there's another issue. They're concerned because Mulvaney in the past has asked to cut defense spending in a way that Republicans don't like. So it'll come down to his hearing next week.
All right, now one other thing I want to ask you about. We know that Republicans want as many of these nominees confirmed as soon as possible. Democrats are not in the majority, but they have the ability to slow them down, and that's what they're doing.
You heard that from Chuck Schumer in John's report earlier. That's right. Democrats said today they are going to allow two nominees to be confirmed tomorrow on Inauguration Day.
Just two.
Just two in the evening. Those are the Defense Secretary James Mattis and also Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. The two Marine Corps generals are going to be confirmed, but not necessarily Mike Pompeo. Senator Ron Wyden has an objection to the CIA director designate. That's a real concern for Republicans. They say that's a security risk. It might be a political risk for Democrats. They say Pompeo is likely to be confirmed soon, but it does not look like tomorrow. As for the rest of these nominees, Democrats say they are planning to slow down the process, that they want more deliberation. How can they do that if they're in the minority? Well, under Senate rules, they can use procedure to add lots of debate time for each nominee. Looks like they're planning to do that. We're watching especially non-controversial ones like Elaine Chao, Ben Carson. What happens with them?
And Republicans not happy about this, obviously.
No, they're not happy. And it's building to not just a sense of, typical strategy here, but real tension between the two sides.
Lisa Desjardins, thank you. Appreciate it. The other confirmation hearing we were watching today was the one for Mr. Trump's pick for the Secretary of Energy, former Texas Governor Rick Perry. Now, Perry called for the elimination of that department when he ran for president in 2012, and then he forgot the name of the department during a debate. Well, much of the department's role is devoted to monitoring, maintaining, and keeping safe the nation's nuclear stockpile. Today, Perry admitted that he did not truly understand its scope and mission until recently, and he said he now has a different attitude.
My past statements made over 5 years ago about abolishing the Department of Energy do not reflect my current thinking. In fact, after being briefed on so many of the vital functions of the Department of Energy, I regret recommending its elimination.
Perry, who previously has denied the science of climate change, also spoke about his views on that subject. Senators pressed him on whether he would even protect scientists within the department and their budget. And along a similar line of questioning, he also was asked about reports that the Trump transition team wants to cut funding for programs promoting renewable energy. Here's how some of that played out.
I believe the climate is changing. I believe some of it is naturally occurring, but some of it is caused by man-made activity. The question is how we address it in a thoughtful way that doesn't compromise economic growth. It affects the affordability of energy or American jobs.
Do you plan to protect the science research at DOE related to climate?
Senator, I am going to protect the men and women of the scientific community from anyone that would attack them, no matter what their reason may be at the Department of Energy.
How do you see your role? You're coming into a new position where we're talking about massive cuts in the kinds of things that you have advocated for, used, supported in your role as governor that are critical to the future of the economy and lowering emissions and creating more efficiencies.
I will be an advocate for that. I will be in the room advocating for these types of things. I'm not going to tell you I'm going to be 1,000% successful in that.
My question is, do you support these cuts? Yes or no?
Well, Senator, maybe they'll have the same experience I had and forget that they said that. But
we're counting on you.
The next round of confirmation hearings starts again on Tuesday. And moments ago, President-elect Trump spoke before the crowd gathered for an inaugural concert at the Lincoln Memorial.
We all got tired of seeing what was happening. And we wanted change, but we wanted real change. And I look so forward to tomorrow. We're going to see something that is going to be so amazing.
January 20th, 2017, the inauguration of Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. Day one of a new era. Join PBS NewsHour for live coverage and analysis you won't find anywhere else. Friday, January 20th at 11 a.m., 10 Central. Only on PBS.
Now to the national security and diplomatic transition from the Obama to the Trump administrations. Last week, I asked outgoing Secretary of State John Kerry how well the transition was proceeding, and he bluntly answered smoothly, because there's not an enormous amount of it. He also said he had yet to meet his designated successor, Rex Tillerson. Today, with less than 24 hours left in his tenure, Kerry's spokesman was asked if the two men had met.
The Secretary made very clear that he was willing to meet with Mr. Tillerson, and as I understand it, they just weren't able to get it on the schedule. So, but he did speak to him on the phone. I think it was trying to work both men's schedule. As you know, the Secretary also went on a week-long trip, so they worked to try to make it happen, and they just weren't able to get it on both men's schedule at a time that was mutually convenient for both of them.
Apart from Kerry and Tillerson, some Obama cabinet secretaries have met their designated successors. But as John Yang reported earlier, the incoming Trump administration was forced to defend the pace of its staffing of important national security and diplomatic jobs today after a series of reports detailed a disjointed transition. For that, we turn now to the author of one of those reports, New York Times White House correspondent Mark Landler, and to Roger Cressy. He was the deputy for counterterrorism on the National Security Council staff from 1999 to 2001. He was there during the transition from President Clinton to George W. Bush. He is now a security consultant. And we welcome both of you to the NewsHour. Mark Landler, to you first. In that story you wrote yesterday, you referred to the staff of President-elect Trump barely having engaged with the current National Security Council staff below the most senior levels. What is the level of contact between the two?
Well, the incoming National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, has met 4 times with his predecessor, Susan Rice, and there has been significant meetings at the deputy level, K.T. McFarland with Avril Haines, and at one level below that, General Keith Kellogg, who's going to be the incoming Chief of Staff of the NSC. But below that level, which is to say all the senior directors that oversee departments in the National Security Council, there's been very little, if any, contact. And this is for a number of reasons, one of which is the fact that the Trump transition has been marked by a kind of a rotating cast. The NSC and the White House is now dealing with the 3rd transition team since the election. And with that constant upheaval, it's been difficult for them to establish relationships, for the Trump people to get the security clearances they need to begin reading classified information. So a process that would have unfolded pretty intensively starting on November 10th or 11th has really only swung into gear really in the last 2 weeks.
Roger Cressy, what are you hearing about how it's going at the National Security Council?
Well, they've definitely lost time, and I think there is some concern on the part of the career people that there is not enough communication with the incoming team so that the new team is fully up on all the nuances of what they're inheriting. I mean, the reality, Judy, is no matter who comes into office, they're always unprepared for what they're about to inherit, and I think there is some concern that there may not be enough preparation before the new team arrives tomorrow.
And Roger Cressy, staying with you, how does this compare to previous transitions?
Well, we've seen some where they've been very short. When I was there in 2001 with going from President Clinton to President Bush, that was very short. But even then, we met with Condi Rice, with Steve Hadley, the National Security Advisor, the deputy. They went around to each office to meet the team that was there that they were inheriting, and also to get a better perspective on what each office was doing. So I think the challenge for General Flynn, for K.T. McFarland, is to get up to speed as quickly as possible with the career people that are staying so they can understand what the current state of affairs are on all the issues they're going to inherit tomorrow.
And we should say General Flynn, of course, is the incoming National Security Advisor to the President. K.T. McFarland is his deputy. Mark Landler, give us a picture of the National Security Council staff. How many of those positions are going to be holdovers, if any, and how many are going to be empty when the Trump team comes in?
Well, Roger knows more about this than I do, but at the level of the professional staff, you have a lot of directorates in the NSC. The senior directors, the people that run those departments, tend to be political appointees, and most, if not all, of those jobs will be vacant and will be filled by the incoming administration. But below that, you have a cadre of professionals at the director level. Most of these people are seconded from other agencies, say from the Pentagon or the State Department, and are at the White House for a set period of time. When the Obama administration came in, they basically held over people in those positions, which provided the important continuity. The Trump team has told me they plan to do the same thing. So it is not as though General Flynn will come in and find an empty building. He won't. He'll find dozens of very well-briefed, experienced, senior-level people. What he will have to do, though, very quickly is put in a layer of senior directors. Now, they say that they have identified and chosen many of these people. They just haven't publicly announced them yet. So that'll all unfold, presumably in the opening days after the president is inaugurated. But again, where they've lost time is in all of these people reading into the reams and reams of paper that lay out the administration's current policies, that lay out the major flashpoints they're going to face around the world. And that's time that they could well have used starting as early as late November and early December of last year.
And Roger Cressy, if you're part of this incoming Trump team, what are you worried that you may not know?
Well, all special assistants to the president are typically political appointees for the first year of a new president. So their job is to shape policy for the new president. The career people that Mark referred to are there to provide continuity of operations to ensure that balls aren't dropped. But they're not going to make any new policy pronouncements. So the new people come in to do two things: to do a review of existing policy to see where they might want to change it, and then to put in place the actual new policy, a presidential review directive to a presidential decision directive. So these senior people that have to be appointed, cleared at the top secret code word level, are going to come in to do that. So General Flynn, KT McFarland can rely on the career people to provide up-to-date information on daily activities, but no new policy is going to happen until this new team comes in at the special assistant to the president level.
And that's where you're talking about a delay. So I finally want to ask both of you, to Mark Landler again on this. As we look ahead to the Trump administration, its foreign policy, its national security policy, do we read something into that by what's happened right now?
Well, look, I think it's fair to say that this election brought a very unexpected outcome, that the Trump people were probably starting off from a standing start. There was a lot of upheaval in the early days. You remember that the original transition team was led by Governor Chris Christie, and that team was purged almost immediately after the election. I guess the one thing I would watch for is if this kind of upheaval, improvisation, frequent shifts, either in personnel or in policy, continue to be a hallmark of the new administration style. If they do, as some people think they will, we could be in for a bumpy ride on national security. But it's also possible that once they get their team in place and they settle down on their key priorities, that we sort of return to regular order and things begin unfolding. And I'm sure Roger will say every administration faces a kind of a baptism by fire. So I don't think it's fair to necessarily assume that these people are going to be off the rails immediately.
Just 15 seconds. What do you think in terms of what this says about the future?
Right. The wheel of the government will continue to work even as these people come in, and we wait for them. But the issue is there's always one thing, as Mark says, that a new administration confronts. For the Bush administration, it was terrorism. For this administration, it's going to be cybersecurity, not Russian hacking, because that's a symptom of the bigger problem, but the bigger issue of cyber, how they deal with that. And we may see something else we're not anticipating. That's going to be their challenge.
Roger Cressy, Mark Landler, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Judy.
Now, our economics correspondent Paul Salmon takes a look at what has become the new normal for many members of the aging middle class: financial fragility. It's part of his weekly series, Making Sense, which airs Thursdays on the NewsHour.
Everybody is pretending.
And that's why you call the book Faking Normal.
Right. Because there's a lot of pressure to seem like you are doing well.
Elizabeth White is not doing terribly well. As she painfully chronicles in the book she's just self-published, 55, unemployed, and faking normal. White's been on the edge of the financial cliff for years, even though you'd never know it from how she looks, or the Washington, D.C. townhouse she bought years ago, one she couldn't even dream of renting today.
But you haven't been in a situation where you literally couldn't afford whatever it is, the condo fee or...
Oh, absolutely, I have. I'm right now have to park outside because I'm in arrears on the condo fee. Right now.
And she's refinanced to the hilt, taking in a boarder.
Well, you haven't used food stamps.
But I have. I've had to.
It's been quite a comeuppance for someone with her background.
I have a bachelor's from Oberlin. I have a master's in international studies from Johns Hopkins. I have a Harvard MBA. I worked at the World Bank, came in through a program where they recruited 5,000 people. They took 2 Americans out of that 25. I was one of the Americans.
But ultimately, White decided to leave the bank to start her own business.
I had a chain of stores, of decorative home stores.
Really?
Yes. I sold some of the things you see here, African-inspired products. I realized that there was an African-American market that wanted things in their home that reflected heritage and culture. If you wanted to give your little girl black ragnando, you couldn't easily find it. So I just curated that from all over. So I then bet the ranch that I could get this going. So I took a lot of my, not all of it, but I took a big chunk of my World Bank money to sort of fund this.
Retirement savings.
Savings. But it wasn't going, it was doing well, but I couldn't see my vendors of artists and producers were not going to be able to blow this out into a national chain. We're already struggling with volume.
Did you sell your stores?
No, closed it in the end. Just didn't work.
But steady consulting work allowed White to maintain an upper middle class lifestyle for a while until the crash of '08.
Within 6 months, I went from, probably close to
$200,000 a year.
Right, to zero.
And after that, the jobs of the past were nowhere to be found.
This is, to me, where the age discrimination piece happened. I find it much harder at this phase of life to get hired than I did earlier.
But you look so young, and I'm not just saying that to, flatter you or something. I mean, you surely can pass now. You're 62 or something? 63. And you could pass for your 50s easily, mid-50s, early 50s, right?
Early 50s is not considered young in the workplace.
No, it's not, as we learned in an interview with economist Teresa Ghilarducci, citing a study by the New York Federal Reserve.
From 45 to 55, wages decreased by 9%. From 55 to 65, another 9%. So this age earnings profile where you kind of peak and then it flattens out and falls, that age of peaking is a lot younger than we ever thought.
And that corresponds to age discrimination as measured in economic experiments by the likes of Joanna Leahy, who sent fake resumes to employers. The red dots show where on the resumes HR managers looked and for how long.
And when does age discrimination start?
Immediately. It starts at age 35.
Really?
Yeah. It's a pretty steady process.
And it's women more than men?
It's definitely women more than men.
No wonder career coaches tell you to wipe the dates off your CV. But, says White,
when they then ask you to fill out the application, that's all algorithm driven, you cannot leave off when you graduated from college. And once you put that date in there,
then it's
they
clear.
know. Now, as you get older, your network also is not what it used to be.
Because they're losing their jobs.
They're losing their jobs. They are retiring. They're not hearing about things. They're winding down. People have died.
So White has been scraping by with scattered freelance gigs.
So it's sort of bits and pieces that allow me to cobble together income.
But nowhere near the income of the past.
No.
Not even close.
No. I mean, again, I have years of, under 30,000.
Help has come from unexpected sources, like neighborhood free spirit Elijah, a clothing minimalist.
I was getting on the far side of where my mortgage company was getting, serious with me.
Because you were behind in your payment.
Behind. He just, Lizzie, I'll do it. I can do it.
But I'll do it meaning I'll make up the difference.
I will do it.
He'll pay your mortgage.
Right. So this is my Elijah. Yeah.
I'm people's Elijah.
The Vietnam vet gets about $900 in monthly benefits, saves almost half.
I'm not a things person. How much money do you think I'm spending on my attire? Okay.
As he says, I have a few friends like you who are in the stuff world, is what he calls. And you're always getting into some kind of mishap.
Grateful to get by, with a little help from her friends, White was also embarrassed.
You're the loser. How can you have this kind of background and be landing here?
There must be something wrong with you.
It has to be. And then you read things like, it's the latte factor. It's all that bottled water you were drinking.
The latte factor, you were spending too much money on at Starbucks.
Right.
But you could have saved more, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So are you...
I could have not started a business. I stayed at the World Bank, not taking that, risk.
But she did. Her reward? Financial fragility. Something she now shares with a surprisingly large portion of the former so-called middle class. From Washington, D.C., this is economics correspondent Paul Salman, grateful to be reporting for the PBS NewsHour.
And we're grateful you are, too. In next Thursday's Making Sense, how common Elizabeth White's plight is these days and her tips for how to be normal in the face of financial adversity instead of continuing to fake it. Tonight marks the end of President Obama's final full day in office. We look back at his years now with someone who was there with him from day one, his press secretary, Josh Earnest. John Yang met with Earnest at the White House to ask him about the challenges of the job and what he wishes for his successor.
I joined the campaign in April of 2007, so it's been a while now.
Josh Earnest was there when Barack Obama was a senator running for president. And he'll be there when the lights go out in the Obama White House.
Thank you all. It's been a genuine pleasure.
Flash forward 8 years. What does it feel like?
It feels like that was a million years ago, but it feels like that million years has flown by.
Earnest took over from Jay Carney as White House press secretary in 2014.
Today, the flak jacket is officially passed to a new generation, Mr. Josh Earnest.
When he first offered me this job back in the summer of 2014, we were talking a little bit about what his expectations were for the person who was going to be in this role. And he said, one of the things you should know is I don't intend to watch your briefing every day. And if there's ever a situation where you're prepared to walk out to the briefing and there's something that you're not sure about or something you need to ask me about, then just let me know. And I'll make sure that you've got an opportunity to come in here and talk to me before you have to go out there and address the public. It's something that I've used frequently to make sure that the information that I'm conveying to the reporters in this room is not just accurate, but accurately reflects the president's thinking.
In 345 briefings, an exercise he's likened to catching javelins, Earnest has defended President Obama's policies.
That's consistent with the president's vision since he took office, and it's also consistent with his record.
Bantered with reporters.
I'm sure we'll try to come up with something to talk about today.
And
even raised eyebrows and drew criticism by mocking then-candidate Donald Trump's appearance.
The Trump campaign for months now has had a dustbin of history-like quality to it, from the vacuous sloganeering to the outright lies to even the fake hair.
Some critics accuse the administration of criminalizing investigative reporting by aggressively targeting leaks. Despite that, Earnest says the toughest part is the unrelenting pace. I don't think people appreciate how early you and other members of the White House staff get here every morning, the meetings you have early to get things going.
So that is the part of it that is challenging day after day after day. It's not that there is any one long day. It's that long day is then followed up by another day that's moving at a pretty good pace.
Despite that, Earnest says he'll miss the daily sense of purpose.
When it's time to get to work, feeling this intense motivation to get the job done and get it done the right way. There's something that really stokes the internal fires about this job that it's hard to imagine how that ever gets replaced, if it ever does.
We made a special one for him.
Oh, wow.
There have been personal perks, like welcoming his beloved Kansas City Royals to the White House as the 2015 World Series champs.
Thank you. You look so powerful.
And having his 2-year-old son Walker meet the president at Halloween.
That's POTUS.
I know, that's POTUS.
But Earnest says dealing with the press day in and day out is serious business. What do you wish for Sean Spicer, your successor?
I hope he succeeds in his job. I think that the critically important job that requires the buy-in, not just of the person who's standing behind the podium, but by a whole White House staff that needs to be invested in his success.
As he prepares to leave the White House, Earnest thinks back to when he moved to Washington 16 years ago. He toured the White House in the closing days of the Clinton administration.
I remember walking into this room, and I took a picture behind that podium, wearing my overcoat, and thought about what a special opportunity it would be to work here in the West Wing. In some ways, my departure here really brings the whole thing full circle.
So, Josh, congratulations.
Thank you.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang at the White House.
And you can find all of our conversations with outgoing members of the Obama administration and other coverage of achievements, controversies, and challenges of the last 8 years in the Obama years. That's on our website, pbs.org/newshour. Now, a veteran filmmaker takes on the art of poetry. Jeffrey Brown has our look at the new movie, Patterson.
I go through trillions of molecules that move aside to make way for me.
Where does poetry come from? It's not a question normally posed by a film.
I remember giving the script, sending it first to Ron, and he called me and said, "Wow, Jim, I think you're really going for the big bucks here. A poet who's a bus driver in New Jersey, you know?"
The script that director Jim Jarmusch shared with his friend poet Ron Padgett was for the film Patterson, and it is indeed about a bus driver, played by Adam Driver, making his daily route through the streets of Patterson, New Jersey, taking in what's around him, overhearing conversations, using the stuff of everyday life to write poems, which we hear him recite and see on screen.
Another one. When you're a child, you learn there are 3 dimensions: height, width, and depth. Like a shoebox. Then later you hear there's a 4th dimension. Time.
That and other plain-spoken poems in the film were actually written by the 74-year-old Padgett, prize-winning poet, essayist, and translator who's been publishing his work since the 1960s. He said he was taken aback at first when Jim Jarmusch asked if he wanted to write new poems for the film.
And then we hung up, and I started thinking, why not? Why do I have to be such a chicken? You know, why can't I just really accept this challenge? And not too long thereafter, and I'd read the script, and I kind of had an idea about this character, Patterson. I kind of found myself falling into what I kind of temporarily fantasized to be his world. I tried to make it by him, not by me, but also by me.
Poetry was also a longtime love of Jim Jarmusch, who, beginning in the 1980s in films like Stranger Than Paradise and Down by Law, established himself as a filmmaker with a very personal and distinctly non-Hollywood vision. As movies seem to get ever bigger and louder, he's managed to set his own pace.
I love the form of filmmaking. I love all the aspects of it, except financing and promoting them. But it's such a beautiful form to me. I know that I'm not able to make someone else's film for them in, say, a studio setting. I can't have other people's input who are thinking about the commercial viability of the film affecting how the film is made or what goes into it. I'd end up in jail having kneecapped some executive who previously ran an underwear factory. You know, I'm a filmmaker. This is what I'm learning to do.
In the film Patterson, Jarmusch has also created an ode to an earlier Patterson, the epic poem written in the 1940s and 50s by one of America's most renowned poets, William Carlos Williams. Williams lived and worked as a doctor in the area. In the poem's preface, Williams writes, "To make a start out of particulars and make them general." The bus driver in the film Patterson is no William Carlos Williams. He's never published a thing and is unlikely to. But he'd understand the sentiment.
Working on a poem for you.
A love poem?
Yeah, I guess if it's for you, it's a love poem.
And Jarmusch picked up on the notion of taking the particulars of everyday life, looking at them, listening to them, and making art from them.
Because he's a bus driver, and we have images flowing past him, both visually and things he overhears, he kind of drifts through his job, which is it's a routine, right? It's all very set for him. And this allows him to just take things in. I think that's what poets, in this case he's a poet, all people who create things, this is what they do. You know, they have to get input from something.
I mean, the stuff of life becomes the details of poetry.
I hope so. I can't figure out where else to get it.
I asked Ron Padgett, who's taught writing to children, college students, and adults, what people too often don't get about poetry.
They're given the quote, I think, wrong or misleading or narrow idea of what poetry is or can be. Yeah. And secondly, they don't value their own imaginations. They just suppress or don't want to deal with their imagination. And yet it's so close to being a poet in many ways. So if we can only bust through those barriers, and maybe a film like Patterson will help some people say, maybe I could write something like this too.
The film Patterson is now in wider release around the country. From New York, I'm Jeffrey Brown for the PBS NewsHour.
Now to another in our brief but spectacular series where we ask interesting people to describe their passions. Tonight, author and futurist Amy Webb offers us a glimpse of things to come in the world of tech. Her latest book is The Signals Are Talking, Why Today's Fringe is Tomorrow's Mainstream.
We don't stop to think about it, but if you really want to freak yourself out and you own a cell phone, go to Google and look up your personal information. Every single place that you've been since you've been online. While we don't think about those digital breadcrumbs, there are lots of third parties out there that are happily scooping them up and doing something with that data. If you stop to think about it, your phone knows you better, has a more intimate relationship with you than whoever it is that you're sleeping with, than your loved one. This is for PBS, isn't it? I can't say that.
You can say that.
We're entering a period in which you can be expected to talk to machines for the rest of your life. The thing that's coming is artificial intelligence. It won't just be you talking to a machine. A lot of it's going to be invisible, and it's going to make our lives easier. It's going to allow scientists to leapfrog ahead in their research. And I do believe that within my lifetime, life as we know it on this planet is probably going to look a little bit different than it is today. There's some really interesting bioinformation tools that are coming to market. So one big trend is how can we prevent against hackers? No matter how hard we try to tell people, you gotta change your passwords, most people don't change their passwords. What if we no longer had passwords, but instead we're using our own biometric information? You're probably already doing that if you have a newer phone. You're using your thumbprint as a way to make payments. Some of the interesting things on the horizon are things like heat maps. All of the capillaries of your face are in very slightly different places, which means that your face sort of gives off this unique heat map. And that unique heat map is one way that we can authenticate you. One of the challenges with technology is that as it becomes more sophisticated, it also becomes more hidden. If you look under the hood of a modern car, you see what looks like a flat surface. Not every person who drives a car needs to be Lewis Hamilton's F1, pit crew boss. But I do think it's dangerous for us to continue going forward without having some of that lexicon. We have to be able to have conversations with each other and with the people creating these devices, because if we can't have the conversations, then we can't ask the questions. And if we can't ask the questions, the problem is that 10 years into the future, we're going to look back at this moment in time and wish that we had done things differently. My name is Amy Webb, and this is my brief but spectacular take on the future.
And you can watch additional brief but spectacular episodes on our website. That's pbs.org/newshour/brief. And a news update. The Pentagon announced this evening that 4 more prisoners have been transferred away from Guantanamo to the United Arab Emirates and to Saudi Arabia. They are the final transfers before President Obama leaves office. That means 41 inmates remain at Guantanamo. And tonight on PBS's Charlie Rose, Vice President-elect Mike Pence on what to expect from the new administration. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. Join us back here tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern for special live coverage of the presidential inauguration. I'm Judy Woodruff. We'll see you online and again right here tomorrow evening as well. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you and good night.
You're watching PBS.